Welcome to the Building Classroom Community Podcast. I am your host, Andrea Earle. This is the show where we talk about all aspects of building community among the learners in your classroom so that every student feels welcome, safe, empowered, and heard. This podcast is my passion project, and my goal is to support classroom teachers with practical, actionable strategies. With over 40 years of teaching experience, I know that small changes can make a big difference in the classroom. With the proliferation of so many digital tools, resources, and subscriptions, it can be hard to stay organized. It can also be hard to provide access to your students and parents in a streamlined way. In this episode, my guest, Jody Green, will be sharing tips on organizing your digital life so that you can spend less time focused on the tech and more time focused on your students. Jody currently works as a technology coach for the La Habra City School District in Southern California. In March 2024, Jody was honored as one of the Women of Distinction for Senate District 34 by Senator Tom Umberg. Jody is a longtime member of Computer Using Educators, aka CUE, and is currently serving with me on the Orange County CUE Board of Directors. Jody is also the current coordinator of the very popular Sticker Swap at the Spring CUE Conference in Palm Springs, California. She also hosts sessions about sticker design and promoting your brand. Shameless plug, if you want to be inspired with a focus on instructional technology, check out CUE.org. If you want to be inspired with a focus on instructional technology, go to CUE.org and check out all of the offerings and events. Welcome, Jody.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So glad you could join us today. So I know that you spent many years as a classroom teacher, but can you share a little bit about your journey that kind of has led you to take on your current role as an instructional technology coach?
I would love to. So my journey began in Chicago, Illinois, in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, where I was teaching my first year was a 3-4 multi-age, and the second year was a 2-3 multi-age. And it was an ESL classroom. So there was bilingual education at the time. So all of my Spanish speakers were in the bilingual classes, and I had a very diverse group of students who spoke. There were about 20 different students in the classroom, and roughly 10 different languages that were going on within my classroom at any given time. And so I really had to be a forward thinker in terms of how can I incorporate technology into this classroom. I had one computer with the floppy disks and CD-ROMs and all of those fun things. But our school had a Mac lab. So I was inspired by my husband, who at the time was still my boyfriend, but he was studying to be a professor of educational technology, and his degree is instructional systems technology. And so he said, like, hey, why don't we do this cool project with your students? They're already writing these like about me books. Why don't we digitize them? And we'll use HyperStudio, and we'll create stacks, and they'll have a whole project that they've done using the computer. So I was like, well, that's a cool idea. So I knew nothing about HyperStudio. I knew nothing about the computer lab, but I had a computer teacher who I went to, and I said, this is what we want to do. And she's like, sure, here's how. And we worked through with her, and Tim and I kind of did the project together, and then we wrote about it and we presented on it and we taught other teachers how to do it. And so that was kind of like the impetus. That was the exciting thing that happened that got me really interested in how technology can be used for students to express themselves. So then I moved to California, and I was at a school that did not have Mac labs. We had PC labs. And at that time, they were used for, just kind of the general things that computer labs are used for. We would go and we would type our papers in Word, and we would, they had a computers class, and the kids would learn all of those skills. And then I started teaching the clear credential course that teachers need in order to get their clear credential in California. At the time, in the early 2000s, they needed to do a computers class. So I started teaching that class, and that led me to teach in the EdTech Master's program, where I was teaching about wikis and students, using Google Docs and collaborating in Google Docs. And I was teaching these pre-service teachers, or actually in-service teachers, how to do this. And I'm like, well, I need to be walking this walk. So I completely took over the computer lab at our school. Like I was, checking it out every single day. We were going and creating all kinds of communication and projects and things like that, where the kids were like really getting into it. We built websites in GeoCities. It was just really, it was fun. So the superintendent at the time had decided that we were going to get iPads in our classroom, and we were going to do a pilot at the middle school. And my principal selected me to run that pilot because it just made sense, since I was already teaching the class and he knew I was teaching this class, and he saw the use that I was doing with my elective classes and with my students just in my general ed classes. So in March of 2012, I got 30 iPads in my classroom. And we immediately dove in with apps like EduCreations and apps that allowed students to really get in there and show their thinking and show their learning and record themselves and take pictures and that kind of stuff. Like, we just immediately went for the creative. And actually, sorry, I got them in January of 2012. In March of 2012, this position was flown. And at that point, I kind of figured, who else has the experience to do this role? Because I saw the path forward. I knew where we were going, and there were lots of qualified people who applied, but I had the experience with the devices, and I also had the experience with the integration and with change. Like, how do you create change in a district? So that's how I got where I am.
That's really cool. Yeah, you take me back a little bit with Hyper Studio and floppy disks. I remember those days.
Yeah.
And you kind of already touched on it, but how did using the technology change, or maybe enhance the culture of your classroom?
There was this like immediate buzz that went on within the class. Like, they just were so excited, and they already had access to some mobile devices that they had been using, that many of them knew what an iPhone was, or they had iPhones. And so they had this understanding kind of what it could do. And it brought us to a more collaborative point. We had one-to-one devices in the class, but even within that one-to-one, I made sure that students were always working in partners or with small groups, so that there was so much more communication that was happening. And then communication could happen not only in our classroom, but like after school and beyond, because they still had access to the docs that they were using. And at that point, we didn't have Google accounts for all of our students at all. Like, they were all using mine. So I created like Mrs. Green email, and everybody signed into that. And so we had to talk about, like, how do you do this without like messing with other people's stuff? Mm-hmm. So we coined the keep your digital hands to your digital self, right?
Oh, I love it.
So they weren't getting into everybody's things and starting to like make messes. And then many of the parents signed off, and they helped their students create their own Gmail accounts, so that I could then that was a whole thing. Like, I had to make sure I had parent permission, and parents were bought in and they understood, and that whole thing. So they helped their students make the accounts, and then we were able to collaborate in a little bit of a different way. But I think it just was the excitement of being able to be together, even when we weren't physically together, was really interesting for them. And getting to share their knowledge in ways that they had never been able to do that before. Because I was very much about giving students options in how they showed what they know at the end of a unit, or like after we read a book, they would have the ability to like, hey, here's these like 18 different project ideas, do what speaks to you. And now they were able to go and make movies and make them at school. And it didn't have to be like, oh, I got my, parents' camcorder and I'm going to, invite everybody over. Like, we could do those things in the context of school. And that was really, really exciting for them.
So that's really cool. I think we've talked about on this podcast before about giving students voice. And when students have an audience beyond the teacher, then they're much more engaged in the process.
Absolutely.
But fast forward to 2024 and the proliferation of all these digital tools, resources. I'm sure your district has just as many subscriptions as mine. And how do you keep it all straight? How do you encourage your teachers to kind of, let's just say, organize your digital life? I mean, our students all have their own emails now. They have one-to-one devices. I don't know if your district, my district, kids take them home. How do you help just from the teacher lens? What do you suggest in terms of managing all of that?
So I see it in like different pockets, right? There's like managing your email and your communication, managing like the tabs and the stuff you're going to use throughout your day, and then managing like your Google Drive, right? So if we start with email, we had come from, when we moved into Google, we came from a Microsoft environment where everybody was really used to using folders.
Okay.
So I think using labels is a great way to organize, and then creating filters so that when new email comes in and hits your inbox, it automatically gets labeled as something. So I can scan my inbox really quick. I change the colors on my filters or on my labels. So I can see like everything in purple is Seesaw. Everything in blue is coming from Nearpod. So if I have a bunch of purple, I'm like, oh, Seesaw was going off this weekend. Or if I have a bunch of blue, then I know that I need to be looking at Nearpod. I also will do that with like if anything's coming in from La Habra schools. So if any of my people that's like that has a high importance. So I know to look at those first. So, and then I try to drag. So you can, when you're in Gmail, you can label everything so that it gets the colors. But then if you want it out of your inbox, you can archive it, or you can just drag it over to that label and then it'll leave your inbox, but it's still like you can still search for it in your, in those folders, or not folders, in those labels. So that's one way. That's, I think, something important to think about with your email. In terms of tabs, I don't know about you, but I'm a 450,000 open tab type of person. So I've organized them in two different ways. So thinking about from your day-to-day, like if you're in the classroom, you have periods 1 through 4. I create tab groups. So if I have, whatever tabs are open for period 1, they're all under my period 1 tab group. And then all the period 2 tabs are open, and then I can close an entire group of tabs. Like once that class period's over, I can just close all the tabs and I don't see them anymore. But first thing I would do in the morning is come in, open everything I need for the day, and then just have them in those groups. And then it doesn't, like, things don't get over one another, and make it, kind of messy. It's just all kind of, they're color coded and they're really pretty. And the other thing I do with that is bookmarks. So you could do, like, if you have something that you do every morning, you could have all 5 of your morning websites in your morning tab or morning bookmark folder. And then you just right click on that folder, and one of your options is open all tabs. So you can open them all up, and then you can close them all back when you're finished for the day, so that all that morning stuff, you don't have to do that every single day where you're coming in and you're like opening all your tabs for the first time, or whatever. It's waiting for you to just open all on its own.
Yeah, Google has or Chrome has the new tab, right? The organizer. So you don't have to use an extension anymore.
Exactly.
Have you played with that? The new tab groups, I think they call it.
Yes, I've been using those for quite some time. So those are the two major ways I would say within Google Chrome to keep yourself organized. In terms of, so I know there are a lot of people who really like Wakelet, or they really like Padlet to like keep all of their websites, all of these are going to be about this, all of these are going to be about this. I tend to use bookmark folders for that. So I have a bookmark folder for AI, and I probably have 450 saved websites in there. So every once in a while, you got to go through and like pare things down and take things out that are irrelevant. I still have a folder from distance learning as like a just in case. I should probably sort of filter those out and see what I still need and don't need. But I know, like, when I think about, okay, this is a great website, or this is a great article, I don't have time to read this right now, but I know what the topic is. I'm just going to throw that into one of these bookmark folders, and then I can come back to it later. So that's another way that I organize that. In terms of Google Drive, and this would hold true if you're using Microsoft, if you're using Google, any place where you have cloud storage, you have to have a folder structure that makes sense. And for me, I like to color code my folders. I like to number my folders. You need a naming convention that makes sense to you, so that when you go to like search for things, it just makes it a lot easier. And it's less time that you need to spend searching, because you already know, like, oh, everything I did in August, I started with 2024 August and then the title or whatever it is. So as long as you have a consistent naming structure, then it makes it a lot easier to find things. And then personally, for organization, I like the Notes app. I like Google Keep. And I put, like, on my desktop, I have like only 5 folders for my desktop. and then everything, but then I have folders within folders, and those folders have folders.
Yeah.
So sometimes like your folder structure shouldn't be so deep that you're opening 15 folders to get to like your root document. But I tend to just try to be smart about how I won't know what's where. Like I just know that that's my brain. Just once I put it in a folder, it's gone. But if I think about what I named it, then I know, like if I'm consistent with the naming, then I know I can just search and I'll find it. I'll find what I need.
Yeah, I think search is one of my favorite tools just on the computer to find things that I've filed, right, for later use. Yeah, I use naming conventions as well. When I taught math, 7th grade math, my folders were all 7.1. That was math 7, unit 1, 7.2, math 7, unit 2. And then it was very easy to find things later.
Yeah, that's a super smart structure.
One of the things our district does for elementaries, they do these hyperdocs, and they add links to all of the resources. So I don't know about you guys, we subscribe to Nearpod and a few other things. And so there's certain lessons that fit with certain units, and it's finding those lessons again when you need them. You don't want to be digging through your Nearpod library or digging through your Brain Pop or whatever it is. So
you can, even within those tools, I'm not as familiar with Brain Pop. One of our sites uses it, but we do use Nearpod district-wide. And what's nice within your Nearpod library is you can create folders within that Nearpod library as well, so that you don't have to like search your entire library. You can just go into one of your folders. I created district folders because I'm a district admin, so teachers can search within our district library and find some of those lessons that like align to our digital citizenship or that align to our ELA adoption. So I've tried to, because I have a little extra time to do those kinds of things, I've tried to pre-organize those for them. There's some of our sites use a OneDoc for resources, kind of like what you were talking about, where everything's just there, and it might be like a link to another link to another link. But if you like, everything you need is just on that one document. And we've tried that for some other things. I think it's just making sure that people know, for like, without a doubt, this is where I go to get any information I need, but I might have to like dig a little within that document.
Yeah, and someone's got to, help keep it up, right? So I was able to do it for my own personal use because I knew what I had in there and I knew what I needed. So it saved me time in planning my lessons. But yeah. When you think about the digital tools that you now have access to, you've talked a little bit about what you used in the past and how you use that to engage your students. Thinking about the tools now, what tools do you see teachers using really specifically to build classroom community, to really focus on their class culture and their community, or maybe what strategies maybe they use, if we're tool agnostic and more like on the strategy?
Yeah. So in terms of I will mention the tools that I think our teachers are using most effectively to build that community, and that would probably be Seesaw and using the Seesaw blog. In addition to the collaborative spaces within Nearpod, and a little bit with Padlet, like anywhere where they can like post something. And I've seen teachers use Google Classroom in that way too, when they ask a question and they give students their wait time, and then they talk to one another and then they answer. So there's a couple of different ways that we're using specific tools. But I think the strategies really are more along the lines of getting students to share their thinking around whatever, the question or the content is. And then how do you respond to people appropriately? So when we first, and that goes a really long way to build community, right? Like in a classroom, you need to feel like you can take a risk and not be afraid that people are going to like laugh at you or make fun of you or say things that might be hurtful. And so that takes some training for a lot of students. And when we first started, I was having our students blog, and we had, they all were familiar with what a blog was. And we went through and talked about like, okay, so what do you see when you see comments on blogs? What kinds of things do you see? And they talked all about some people are really nice, some people are really mean, whatever. And then we talked about like, how do you respond appropriately? So it's not just like, cool post, bro, but it's more like, here's how I'm connecting to your ideas. So we spent time with like sentence stems, and we spent time with doing these things verbally. We blogged on paper where students would write a paragraph. At least two people had to respond to everybody's, like you could respond to as many as you wanted, but everybody needed at least two responses. And then we shared about the responses that they received, and how they might respond back to that person. Because really the purpose of a blog is, yes, you're sharing your information, but you're also really starting a conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to put something up and, say like, these are my thoughts, and somebody responds to you, well, respond back. Like, don't just let them be like, yeah, that's great. And that was part of it too, is that we were really making students aware that it wasn't appropriate if a student is sharing something in a blog or sharing a discussion post, just responding as like, oh yeah, good job, is not going to cut it. This is supposed to be a conversation that we're having. So you need to really dive in and, look at some of the accountable talk and use some of those sentence starters and sentence stems to be sure that you are responding fully and appropriately.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, I love blogging. I love the opportunity for students to have those interactive conversations. Mm-hmm. We use discussion posts in my district through Canvas, right. But it's the same idea, right? Students sharing their ideas and then learning to respond appropriately. And that does go a long way to building your classroom community.
It does. And we do that too now. Our teachers who use the Seesaw blog, they'll do the same thing where the students will either share the work that they want to put on the blog themselves, or teachers will be, like, hey, can I highlight this work from you and put this on our blog? And then they practice how to respond to one another. And my best practice for teachers always, always, always is to keep moderation on, no matter what. Even if you fully trust your students and you're like, nothing's going to happen, it will happen. Someone will try to break it. Even, someone will try to get by with something. Adults do the same thing. So in PD, I usually don't moderate in PD. I just remind people like, hey, like, this is a public forum, so please be sure that you're posting what you would want other people to see. But for primary students, it's always best to make sure that the students know that you're going to be seeing it before anybody else does, and that you're not going to approve anything that's not appropriate.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know, that on Padlet also, mm-hmm. you can moderate posts. So kind of check that with whatever tools you're using.
Yes.
Earpod as well. You can moderate the collaborative board. So there's lots of ways to kind of help protect our kids and give them those walls, but give them that freedom as well. Right.
Yeah. Just kind of like with the new term I like with AI is guardrails. Mm-hmm. So you're not trying to be a gatekeeper. You're just trying to be a guardrail to make sure that if a student posts something inappropriate and it doesn't go through you first, it just derails everything, because everyone sees it and then they crack up and then they're trying to respond and everybody's trying to just put a string of emojis instead of actually answering your question. And it just devolves into something that is less than stellar. So just especially at the beginning of the year, or especially the first, even if it's not the beginning of the year, if it's the first time you're doing something with students, they might have done it in another classroom, but they know what they can get or what they can't get away with there, but they don't know what they can get away with you. So they're going to push boundaries.
Yeah. But once students do learn, even the youngest students, once they learn how to respond to each other and they take it seriously and really treat it as a conversation, the things they share and their ideas are just amazing. And the fact that they're writing not just for the teacher, right? It really builds the buy-in. I mean, I find that students are much more willing to write and write more if it's not for me, right? If they're writing it for their peers or for their parents or the community, then if they're just doing something for me.
I agree wholeheartedly. I have found that same thing to be true.
And sometimes it's kind of fun. You have to kind of contrive an audience for them, but with blogging, you have, a larger audience.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I like about the blog part of it, is that it is that larger audience that is pretty immediate, especially like if you have your families connected in Seesaw, it can be like the students create something and within 2 minutes somebody is responding to them. We used to with when we would in sixth grade write our opinion pieces, it would always be, well, at the time it was argumentative, and it was always be like, okay, you need to write a letter to the principal explaining to them why this rule should be changed or why you want this to occur at the school. And while that's an authentic audience, it wasn't immediate, and it wasn't always super authentic because they didn't always get a response.
Right.
But when you're doing that digitally, it just opens it up, and it really does make students strive to do their best, more so than just those internally motivated students who want their paper up on the wall.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. So I wanted to ask you, with all the new tools popping out and the new resources, how do you choose what you're going to invest your time in?
So I will pretty much try anything when it comes out. So if there's a new tool, I'm like, cool, let's see what that's about, because it might be something that I need for my teachers. And if it's something that I can't figure out within the first 5 minutes and figure out like, how might I use this? I usually am like, I'll come back to it another time. So I'm looking for user interface and like super, super quick ease of use. I don't want anything to be like, if I have to spend so much time learning that tool, and there is a tool right now that is an alternative to one that we've been using for a long time that's going away. And I'm not going to name it because I don't want to call anybody out, but it is a tool that I get, but there's so much to it that I'm struggling to see how it's going to benefit primary and middle grade students without overwhelming them. So I'm looking for like the real basic use case scenario for that. And I like it, and I'm sharing it with teachers, and I'm saying like, this is a tool for you to use. But I've found that if I don't train somebody on something, it doesn't necessarily get used even like on their own.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things that teachers will go after that just because they see the benefit of it, and they'll be like, yeah, I can see where this would be helpful for me, so I'm going to go for it. But most things, if I'm like, this is a great tool for this, and this reason, unless there's been some kind of a formal training, it's not going to happen.
Like you said, some things that are easy to pick up and jump right into, teachers are
Right.
more likely to. But if you've got to invest a lot of time in figuring it out, there's so many other things, on your plate as a classroom teacher. You just don't have time.
Exactly.
So if districts have somebody like you or me, that are in these coaching roles, right? I encourage you to reach out. If our listeners reach out to those people in your district that are there to support you. Because
100%.
I mean, I'm waiting for I'm waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah.
Invite me over. We love helping and playing, and we can do some of that legwork for you. And I know a lot of districts have people in similar positions, and I know unfortunately some don't. So
Absolutely. So I'll be your person. If you're in a district that doesn't have that, reach out to me. I'll be your person.
absolutely.
But in addition to like just trying all the things and taking, finding like if it's useful, if it's easy, then I'm going to invest a little more time in it. I'm also looking for tools that have some kind of longevity. They've been in the market for a while, and they're still kicking, right? And so most of the time that means that there is a freemium to that tool. I love free things. What teacher doesn't? But like, you really like, it's not sustainable to have a tool that's completely free forever and ever, and the entire functionality is free, because these are people with jobs, and they have like, maybe there's one piece of their tool that's free, or they give you, like this basic platform. And if you can work within that, great. Some people, sometimes it's like the monthly subscription for $7 a month. All right, I can afford $7 a month, so I'll just pay for that myself. Sometimes teachers will go and ask their principals, like, I'm really invested in this tool. Can you buy this just for me? And then I'll bring my team along, and then we can like start to look at how it might, grow in our entire school. But those are, I'm looking for a tool that's been around for a while. I'm also looking for a tool that allows for creativity, for student creativity. So if I'm going to invest in something, I want it to have multiple functions. I want it to be able to stand on its own. I don't want something that is drill and kill kind of app, or that is just, it serves one function and that's it. Because I just don't think if we're going to spend our time on something, it needs to be multimodal in some way. And I'm sure, like off the top of my head, I'm thinking of several tools that are like that. And somebody might come at me and be like, oh, well, there's this tool and it only does this one thing, but it's great for this. That's fantastic. And I agree with that. And, sometimes there are tools that do that, but I'm looking for specifically for tools. If I'm trying to train a teacher and get a teacher to use it, I want there to be multiple times. I don't want it to just be something that can be used in math or just be something for science. Like I want it to be a tool that spans any kind of curriculum, spans grade levels, and just allows students to create in some way.
Well, you're right, because you would you invest so much time learning how to use a tool, how to implement it with your students. You want to be able to reuse it over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. So that students aren't constantly learning new tools. Because in the classroom, I was like you, oh, something new, let's try it. Let's see how the students, respond to it and what I can do with it. And I was always willing to kick the tires. But things that didn't have that staying power, or didn't have the engagement that I thought it would, I let those go,
Right.
because you can't do everything. And, there's 10 different quizzing tools, right?
Yeah.
I know some teachers like to try one week and one the next week, but then you're constantly teaching those routines. And one thing about building your classroom community is you need those routines in place, and you need the consistency and the repetition of routines, because then it takes the focus away from the procedures and puts it on the doing, the creating, and the learning. So
I agree with that in terms of like the quizzing tools and possibly like the content delivery tools. So if you're a district that has Nearpod and Pear Deck, or your district pays for one but you prefer the other, I have no problem with that. And by reusing those same tools for the sake of repetition, like you said, just kind of knowing those things. That said, when it comes to the creativity tools, I want students to be fluent in 5, 6, 7, 8 tools, so that when it comes time for the end of a unit, of a book, of a something where students are showing you what they know, they have all these different options at their fingertips, and they can choose the one that works best for them. Yep. In the same way that if I say we only have the free version of quizzes, we have the free version of Kahoot, we have the free version of Book It, like we have all of these different, we have Socrative, but only free. If you want to pay for it yourself, or you want your site to pay for it, great. We're not going to pay for those things. There's a lot of functionality within the free versions. I'm not going to tell you which one to use. Like, here's 4 you can choose from. Pick it. Pick the one that works for you. Pick the one that works for your students. I don't want to do that to kids either. When it comes time for them to show their, what they know, I don't want to say you can only use Pick Collage, because that's the app that we have. Like, if that's the purpose, if the purpose of an activity is to teach them how to use that tool, then yes, everybody has to use Pick Collage. But by some point in the year, they should have enough tools under their belt that you can say, I need to know that you understand the theme of Walk Two Moons. Go.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. Yeah, it is important to do some lessons to teach students how to use the tools. We talk about our kids being digital natives, but the reality is there's things they just don't know. Centering, I came across this last week. The students didn't know how to center their title. They were pushing spacebar, until they got to the center. And you'd think that's, we've been centering titles, for years, but things they don't know. So we do need to teach them how to use these tools, but then give them the freedom to mix them and match them and put them together in a way that makes sense for them, so they can be creative and
and
demonstrate what they know. Yeah, I really like that. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up? I mean, we could be talking for hours, and
Yes, this is a subject I could definitely talk for hours on. Like you mentioned at the beginning, like reach out to the people who hold who are in roles similar to this one, who are in coaching spaces, because they typically have the ability to like do some of that vetting for you, right? So I had a teacher recently ask me about an app that she wanted to use with ELD. And she's like, I only heard about it, but I heard it's good for this. Like, what do you think? And I'm like, well, I'm not familiar. So I went and I played and I was like, well, I think it could be great, but I think also you have middle school and this seems really childish. So I don't know about your students, but I feel like if I were to try to bring this to the students that I had in middle school, that they would be like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. But at the same time, it was game based and students do
Mhm.
love playing games. So there were just a couple of different things. So then you have a conversation with each other about, how might we make this work? Or what else do you know about that could work instead? And I get a lot of that. Teachers will say, I was denied this app because of the privacy policy. What else do you know? And then I have time or I have space to do those deep dives where I can help the teacher troubleshoot and save them time. My other thing is this, in terms of organizing your digital life, the whole purpose of that is to save yourself time or save yourself space, make your life easier. So when you find tools that make your life easier, share what they are and share how you're using them, because other people may find the same thing. And it's always nice, like sharing is caring, right? It's always nice to share with others the tools that you're using to make your life easier. Especially with AI now, there's a new tool every 4 seconds. So if you find one that works for a specific reason for you in whatever way, let other people know about it, for their own use, not necessarily for student use yet. There are only two really for student use that are approved just for different districts, but just sharing is caring.
I agree. I agree. And, sometimes teachers think, oh, I'm not doing anything special. I'm not doing anything different. And I actually thought that for a long time, and I've been teaching a long time and been innovating using technology since the early 90s. Right. And I thought, oh, I'm not doing anything special. And then I see other people posting and I'm like, wait, I'm doing that. So you never know who you're going to inspire. And actually, Jody, that's kind of what prompted me to do this podcast, is that, I want to share what I'm doing and I want to hear what other people are doing, because together, teaching's hard. Teaching's
Mm-hmm.
hard, but together it's fun. And I think that's probably one of my favorite things about teaching, is just the collaborating and sharing ideas and learning new things. But it'd be terrible if we did it in a vacuum.
I completely agree. And those teachers who are coming up now who have the ability to use social media, where
Mm-hmm.
when we were coming up, that didn't exist. I had the people in my school, and sometimes I would know people like in the district, but that was like it. There was the collaboration looked so different, and the ability to learn from one another looked so different. And I love what you said about like, you never know who you're going to inspire. What you might be doing something that you don't feel like is like, oh, that's so innovative, but you might go share it somewhere and somebody has never heard of that thing, or they've
Mm-hmm.
never done this before, and they're like, oh, well, if that person's doing it, I can do it. And that's another big one too, is that, Andrea and I are, in our district, we might be the tech quote unquote experts about certain things, where that might be intimidating for some people. But as we work with people who are on different campuses, and they start saying things like in the lounge, like, oh, like Jody came and we did this activity
Mm-hmm.
and here's how we did it. Somebody else is like, oh, you guys did that? Like, I could try that. That doesn't sound too hard. That doesn't sound overwhelming for me, even though I have like all these other things on my plate and technology isn't really my jam. And so it starts to spread, and it starts
Mm-hmm.
to excite other people and inspire other people to do things differently in their classrooms.
And let's face it, our kids are digital creatures. They love their technology. They get pretty much all their news, right, from YouTube. And I mean, I don't think my teenage son, he only watches TV if we force him to, right? He's on his technology, he's playing his games, he's doing his homework online, he's doing his creation,
Yeah,
online. So we need to tap into that energy and use it for our own purposes. Right.
exactly. Exactly. And have our students use what they're using, um, for good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because let's
Like,
face
let's,
it, when they go out into the world, working, they're going to be involved in all sorts of different jobs, and we don't know what technology they're going to have access to or is going to be created in the future. But if we can teach them to be creative now and to be innovative and resourceful, and I think that's more important than memorizing all 50 states and their capitals, because I can Google that.
Yes, I agree. Problem solving, the critical thinking are really key. A lot of those quote unquote soft skills, those are the things that our students need. And they too need to know how to organize themselves digitally. Like we're talking about organizing for the teacher, but I think when we share our strategies with them, it's helpful because they don't know what they don't know.
Correct.
Nobody knows what they don't know, obviously, but that's like a big saying. And if, the surprise about kids not knowing how to center something, like we have these expectations because we know how to do it. The kids are going to know how to do it too. And, they have technology, they're attached to their phones. They have it all day, every day, but that doesn't mean they know how to learn with it. They just know how to use it for personal use. So the more we can do to teach them how to use it for their education and teach them how to organize themselves so that their stuff isn't everywhere and they don't lose track of time. Teach them how to set alarms on their clock, teach them how to create calendar events that provide reminders to them every 10 minutes before the event is supposed to happen or whatever it is. They could set reminders for doing homework, set in a homework alarm. Those kinds of things, the executive functioning that we just sort of expect them to have and they don't, those can be things that we teach them too.
Learned. Yep. Those are all learned skills. So, well, thank you so much, Jody, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope everyone found our conversation about organizing your digital life as a teacher insightful and practical. I got some new ideas. I'm going to go check out I don't use labels yet in my Gmail. I think I need to start.
Oh, for sure. And if you're not sure how, not you, I'm, whatever. Well, but for the listener, if you're not sure how to do it, you can reach out to me. Andrea can put my,
I'll put Jody's contact information in the show notes. Yeah. Because Jody's a great resource. So
you can Twitter me, X me. I don't know, but you can find me on social. You can find me on social at Peerless Green. And
you can find us at the next Q event. We will be there.
Yep, we will be.
So everyone, remember, staying organized not only helps you manage your time, but also enhances the learning experience for your students. So until next time, keep building those strong classroom communities. Thank you for joining us today.